Hello! Today we're going to be talking about the novel 4 by Veronica Roth and a little bit about the Divergent trilogy. This novel is an extension of the Divergent series, a story about a young girl who leaves her family to choose a new community. One of 5 that, when chosen, reaffirm your personality type and prohibit you from ever leaving or risking the possibility of being shunned by society forever and becoming factionless. In Divergent, the heroine Beatrice Pryor, or Tris, finds a love interest called 4, hence what this book is about. It is his perspective of their experience. What you might not know is that the author, Veronica Roth, originally intended for the Divergent series to be written through his eyes. Early in the series, she had a change of heart and switched it to Beatrice Pryor, who, in my opinion, was sort of a mistake. 4 sadly comes off, especially in the movies, as sort of a male heartthrob, and Theo James, the actor who plays him, doesn't really make it easy for us to unsee that, but he's far more interesting than we notice in Divergent. I think Veronica Roth failed to trust her instincts, and that's why we have people who can't differentiate the Hunger Games from Divergent at all. You know those people, right? So you're telling me that the story is about a girl from the future who lives in a limiting society where your personality and aptitudes are determined by your region. And there's a love interest, and an overthrow of power. And there's a risk of death in every book. Yes. So that's the Hunger Games? No, it's Divergent. As you can see, the story is a little too parallel to our other favorite trilogy, and the identity of Tris really doesn't make it much easier. Divergent in itself was interesting because it's the story about an enhanced study of cultural values. But to be honest, 4 is the more complex character. He grows up in a faction that teaches you to be invisible, and with a father that wishes he actually were. Formerly known as Tobias Eaton in Abnegation, he grows up in what feels like an eternal paradox. Everywhere and by everything, he is made to learn that self-indulgence is a sin. The factions are so fanatical with their representation and their obsession of being the core values of their faction that it takes almost a spiritual approach somewhere along the book. We see clear indoctrination, forms of shaming or bigotry, pressure from friends and family, fear of the unknown, fear of choosing your own morals and standards and destiny, and a sense of comfort through identity and community. In no way am I saying that religion is bad. I'm saying that the fixation each faction seems to have on their core values at times represents or resembles standard worship throughout the world. And ironically enough, they idolize a system without any awareness of their creator, who is somewhat invisible, and watches all aspects of their life through the security feeds in another place that they are unaware of or do not know exists, kind of like an omnipresent God. It might be why we perceive Tobias's father, or 4's father, as sort of a sinner. He is beyond self-indulgent. His mother as well. Dad indulges in his image, reputation, and sadistic behavior. Mom dawdles in escapist daydreams so powerful she eventually abandons her only son and family and life to go pursue these dreams, thus leaving Tobias alone with a physically abusive monster and nothing or no one to help him or even hear him out. Desperate to escape his reality or his environment, Tobias decides to choose Dauntless in the choosing ceremony and leave Abnegation forever. He goes with the satisfaction of knowing that in Dauntless he will be allowed to be free, or have as much freedom as he thinks they have, and with the knowledge of, hey, this is going to shame my father the most. Now, chronologically, things start to get interesting. Corruption amongst factions has recently begun. The erudite have started seeking out the Divergent. They have infiltrated and observed all of their simulations to report any anomalies. However, despite all efforts to be submissive and dull, Tobias turns out to be rebellious and brilliant. Now known as 4, we see him as intelligent, brave, perceptive, and definitely stronger than he is perceived. He hides his talents well and for the most part flies under the radar under Dauntless as one of the rest. Oh, and his mom is still alive. She's a political refugee, and on occasion he becomes a spy for her. 2 years pass, and then Beatrice Pryor comes along. I personally thought that the whole 4 and Tris thing was a little cliche, but hey, I liked Twilight, and I guess that makes me a literary nothing. But really 4's experience in this book feels more endearing and more authentic. His attraction could be biologically more believable, but it's definitely psychologically way more believable. He may appear to be drawn to her for no reason, for the same way she appears to be drawn to him for no reason, but he has a little bit more background information that has it make sense. You can see it unfold quite clearly. Similar backgrounds, values, temperaments, a similar desire to discover and prove themselves, and similar manners of being. It just seemed nicer from his point of view. It really did. And then it ends, and I was a little bit upset again because Veronica Roth doesn't really continue the story, and I always feel a little bit cheated after Divergent on 4 because we were left with so many questions after the series. So I decided to present a few of those questions and see if we can get ourselves thinking. And of course, if you have read Divergent, you really will enjoy this because the character is so endearing and more engaging and interesting, in my opinion, than Tris, who was always just a tad boring for me. But I still cried when she died. So here's a few questions about this world that I feel we need to ask. Number 1. The factions are an isolated scientific experiment. What do you think was the sole purpose? What were some controlled factors and variables that might not have been mentioned in the book, but taken into account in their world? Why would a future world need to identify personality so strongly? And if they did this in the future, what kind of science might they be holding back from us at the time? Is it that far in the future? Could it be a present-day scenario? Do you really think the world is in a state of disarray, or were they simply curious about what would happen with this experiment? Could this have been one of many experiments with different values, different factions? In Divergent, the factions are selflessness, kindness, honesty, bravery, and intelligence. If you were to create a Divergent society, what 5 core values would you select? In your opinion, which is the strongest faction and which is the weakest? If the idea of factions indeed does not work, then what exactly is a Divergent person? And why was Tobias not Divergent? In my opinion, they all were sort of interrelated. You need the abnegation trait of selflessness to have the amity trait of kindness and giving. To be honest and candor, you're going to have a little bit of that dauntless edge, of a little bit of bravery and honesty to be able to stand up and voice your opinion. If Dauntless and Erudite teamed up, it's because they saw similar traits amongst themselves and similar core values that allow them to work well together. They weren't always under simulations and serums that made them obey the Erudite. They thought that what they were doing was correct. So if these are all interrelated factions, and there could indeed be more experiments and more factions where people value other traits, then what is a Divergent person? Tobias beats the serum injected into him at the end of Divergent once he is talking to Tris. Is there a possibility that maybe he is slightly divergent, and that divergence is simply a sort of trait that can be developed throughout time, like knowing that certain simulations you have to respond to in a certain way, knowing that you have some power to make decisions throughout them. Perhaps that's why Tobias was able to do what he did at the end and simply step out of the serum. Remember, his father taught him how to work with serums, how to work with these kinds of things throughout his childhood. So maybe divergence, the divergent traits, are something that can be taught. and that's why they don't respond that well to mind control. And my last question is, should Beatrice Pryor have been killed at the end of Divergent, or is Veronica Roth a tantalating dystopian temptress with an inkling for creating disruption in our little fandom hearts and shredding it into little million pieces so that we never want to read anything about Divergent again? Please make a sequel. So yes, at the end of the day, read this. It's sort of a guilty pleasure, and I hope you have fun with the questions, and if you can create more and make us think a little bit about the world, then just leave something below. Layers!